Okay. And for the intro to APA 7 workshop today, we're going to discuss some very basic, like what do you need to know essentials of APA 7 to be successful in your program here at USD. So I'm going to share with you the APA 7 kind of quick guide that I've developed. The years, this will be available in the chat. I would recommend that you bookmark this link. I update it pretty frequently as APA 7, guidelines and things come out. And we're going to discuss quite a few things on this document today. So, as we get started, if you have any questions that you would like me to address during the session, please place those in the chat and I will address them as we hit the information. Okay. Other thing I'm going to do now is share my screen. Can everyone see the APA 7 style workshop document? You either say yes or give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you. Again, y'all can go ahead and drop any questions that y'all have in the chat. And I will get started on discussing some of the essentials here. One of the things that's important for you to know is that I am your resident APA person. And part of my job is knowing APA, knowing the changes in APA, how it applies to various formats and the work that we do associated with teaching, learning, research, all of that. And you are not expected to memorize the APA manual. That's why the manual exists. That's why the supplementary resources exist, is so that they are there as a reference for you. I can guarantee you that I am not memorizing the APA 7 manual, nor will I ever attempt to do so. However, because I work with APA so often, there are things that come readily to mind when I'm working with it. And in that note, if you ever need more help with APA, you are welcome to email me. You are welcome to make an appointment on my appointment calendar. Those are the best ways to reach me. And people will ask, like, what's an example of, an APA question that people will ask me? Well, sometimes people will find an online resource and they're not sure how to cite it. They're not sure if it's a blog or an online magazine article or what it is. And so they may send me the link to that item and say, hey, V, I'm not sure how to cite this. Can you help me? And then I'll evaluate the resource and send the person a sample of what that citation would look like. And when I say citation, generally, I'm talking about the reference list citation, the full citation that's at the end of, when we're writing a manuscript or when you've cited something on a presentation or a poster or whatever, that full citation that you're including. When I'm talking about an in-text citation, that can typically be two things. One, there's the narrative citation. And that is when you have named the author or contributor first, and then the date or some other identifying information. Typically, the date is in parentheses. The second type of in-text citation is what's called the parenthetical citation. That's the one that you typically see at the end that may have the author's name and the date within the parentheses. Some FAQs here. We officially transitioned to APA 7 in the fall of 2020. I get this question all the time. Should you purchase the APA 7 manual? That's your business about what you do with your money. If you are a sole student, it is very likely that having the APA 7 manual is listed on your requirements. I own 2 copies, but I also work with APA a lot, so it makes sense for me to own the manual. But there are plenty of resources that are listed on this quick guide and within this document that are kind of the most frequently cited things that I've observed that people use. So again, it depends on what you have going on. Are the citation managers like EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero, RefWorks, Mever updated for APA 7? Yes. And there are different style guides that you can use within APA 7, or excuse me, within the citation managers to format APA 7 for different documents, like for a paper, for an annotated bibliography, for a CV. So they have different styles that will help you format those. Okay. And I've also included some APA resources here. The ones for APA 7 listed here. Copley Library does keep copies of APA 7 on the reference. So if you need one, it's there. There are tutorials that can help you get acclimated to APA 7 if you want to use them. The APA 7 style blog is one of my favorite tools, and it is because it's the official companion to the publication manual. So any changes that have occurred or will occur up until the change to APA 8, whenever that comes out, will be placed on the APA style blog. So this is where we have the current communication going on about what's happening in APA. And one of the reasons that the APA style blog is such a great resource is because of how it was used with APA 6. We had the 6th edition for about 10 years, and there was a lot of change in how we cite and what we use in our scholarly resources and practice. So, you know, how to cite Twitter, how to cite YouTube, all of those things were discussed and, you know, and settled on the APA style blog. This is also a place where you can get some, you know, quick, like, how do I cite a website? How do I cite whatever? So you can use the search here. And if you want, you know, how do I cite a government document? It's a quick way to kind of get some information about that. Okay. Purdue OWL continues to be a leader in resources about citation. One of the reasons I like the Purdue OWL reference guide is because it also will link you to the old APA 6 version. And I know that oftentimes people will just Google. They'll use whatever search engine they have, and they'll Google, how do I APA, how to cite a website. Well, if you click on the wrong link, you may land on the APA 6 style for Purdue OWL. But everything that's linked within this guide will also have a link to the current and the previous version, okay? So, for example, articles and periodicals here for APA 7. If you happen to land for some reason on the APA 6, you have a note up here in bold, in red, that says you need to go to the APA 7 version. Okay? Easy peasy. And I've listed other resources here for you, including the main APA style website, some quick introductions to APA 7, and some of the major changes here. DOI lookup is a free tool from Crossref, which is a system that's used to help systems talk to each other about scholarly resources. So it's one of kind of the back end tools that we use in order to find a resource using the DOI. This is not as much of an issue as it used to be. Because previously you may use a resource and the DOI number was not anywhere on the document. But in order to cite it, you needed the DOI. Well, this was a great tool to be able to find that. But with APA 7, one of the major changes is that DOIs are now formatted as URLs. Okay, so it's much easier to find those DOIs. And if you're not familiar with the term DOI, it stands for Digital Object Identifier, which is a unique number that specifically identifies that particular resource. Every academic resource that's coming from some type of scholarly publication, it doesn't mean that it has a DOI. Just like every journal doesn't have an impact factor, every journal article does not have a DOI. And some book chapters have DOIs as well. So Digital Object Identifier. Okay. Now the APA Journal Reporting Standards, or JARS, is the standardized way of how you should write up your study information. So if you've conducted a quantitative study, or you've conducted a qualitative or mixed method study, then JARS is going to tell you the essential information that you should have in your manuscript for accurate reporting of said study. For example, for a qualitative study, it gives you very clear information about what you need to report and how you need to report it. The standardization helps keep the academic flow going, and it helps standardize the expectations of what we would see. Does this mean that you can't add anything else? No. But at the minimum level of work that you're doing and reporting in your manuscript, this is what is expected of an APA style paper or publication. Get rid of some of these. JAR stands for Journal Reporting Standards. Journal Reporting Standards. Okay. APA has been out for over a year now, so it's not really new. But for a lot of folks who may be new into grad school or new to APA 7, this information may be new to you because again, we had APA 6 for 10 plus years. Or you may be coming from a different style format that's MLA, Chicago, Turabian, whatever. So this information may be new for you, and that's why I created this chart. So the 7th edition changes are in bold. Previously in APA 6, you had to include the location of the publisher. This was pretty difficult to discern, particularly with books, because a publishing house, especially one that's one of the larger ones, like Random House, they have locations in New York and Chicago and wherever else. Well, which location do you use? Well, in order to get rid of that question, because it's really not essential for us to find the resource to know where the location of the publisher is, now we're only including publisher name. Okay. So for each one of the new items, I've given you the standard kind of frame of what it looks like, and then an example of how this would look in practice. The format for how we cite 3 to 5 authors in an in-text citation looks different now. It used to be that you would name all the authors and then do et al. In subsequent citations. And now it's more standardized. The first author's name followed by et al. In every citation, unless you have a resource that has the same authors, but maybe it's a different name for each resource. So in that case, you could, say one is Kernis and Smith et al., and then the other one would be Kernis et al. Okay. We also now have more guidance on how to cite anywhere from 3 to 20 authors. This is really useful for when you have things like government documents or reports that have a lot of contributors. Then that's when this is helpful. So there's guidance for that. As I said earlier, DOIs were previously formatted in 2 different ways with APA 6, and now all DOIs are formatted as URLs. This is also super helpful because we are quite e-resource heavy. And so this helps people quickly get to some version of the resource that you're looking for. Does this mean if you include a URL that a person is going to be able to get to the full text? Not in all cases. Access to resources is highly dependent upon many variables, including institutional access, whether or not that resource is open access or not, how your computer is set up. Like, there are so many variables. But what it does do is that it gets the person to at least some basic information about said resource. If it's a journal article, they may see, author information, title, and an abstract, even if they don't have full text access. Or if it's a book chapter, they may be directed to the book resource for that from the publisher. Okay. For URLs, we no longer use retrieved from unless a retrieval date is needed. Retrieval dates tend to not be needed unless the housing platform changes a lot. Okay. And that's a special case, not the common rule for a lot of websites. So retrieve from, you typically won't use. Do you use as cited by in APA 7? Yes. If you are citing someone who is citing someone else, yes, there is a way to format that. However, that is an exception to the rule. If you are citing as a secondary source, APA assumes that you have done your due diligence to find the original source and could not do so. That's the assumption. The preference of APA is that you cite from the original resource, not as a secondary. However, there is a format for as cited by. But before you do that, I highly recommend that you reach out to a librarian like me who can possibly locate the original source so that you can cite from that one. Okay. It's kind of like the same exception of using block quotes. You don't want to do that too many times. Website names. We had no guidance before, and now we have very specific guidance on how you label the site's name. One of the things I've observed through this change is that people are often not aware what the site's name is, and so they just making up stuff. But remember, the whole purpose of citations is so that if a person wants to find the resource that you have cited or referenced, then they can get pretty close to finding, the item. Because we are so e-resource heavy, so online heavy, having a site name is super helpful in our let's Google this world. Okay. Now, a different format for ebooks in the references. Previously, we would place an emphasis on the format of an ebook. No one really cares about that now. So you essentially cite it in the same way you would a print book. However, if say it's an audio book versus an ebook, you would put that format, but no one cares anymore if it's coming from Kindle or Books A Million or whomever. No one cares about that. Okay. Content contributors, other than the authors, we had vague guidelines before, and now there are very specific guidelines for how you cite other contributors. This is important when you are citing things like podcasts, movies, things like that that may have a streaming format. This is particularly important. So there are guidelines for how you cite a podcast host, a director, anything like that. We now have some specific guidelines for. They, them, and their. APA officially endorsed they, them, and their as the gender neutral pronoun preference. Previously, there were a lot of assumptions of the gender of a particular contributor. And so to get rid of that issue, instead of calling someone she, because maybe that person has a feminine sounding name, use they. So your example here, the researcher uses SPSS to analyze their data. This also gets rid of the need to use like she/him, they, them, and their. Descriptive phrases. No guidelines before. Now we are trying to be very specific in our research, and I have some examples here for you. The point of this is an understanding that we need to acknowledge a person's humanity over their issue. For example, instead of drug users, people who use drugs. Humanity before issue. Calling people like the gays or the blacks or the whites. You're being more specific. Gay men. Capitalize the B in black when you are referring to people, not the color. Okay. This would be the same if you said brown women. If someone refers to themselves that way. So you would capitalize the B in black. This acknowledges us as people, not a color. And specificity in terms of age range or other variables like that, instead of saying people over 65, well, it would be, you would be more specific about the actual population group of your study or the study that you're talking about. So if the study only worked with people in the range of 65 to 75, then you would say that instead of saying people over 65. What if not BIPOC? And is white, are you asking if white is acceptable as lowercase? So there's still debate about that in some circles. But the APA standard and recommendation would be that white, when referring to the people, would be the same as the B in black. It is capitalized. Now, there are some scholars and practitioners who use lowercase w in white, particularly in spaces where white people may be the dominant, and those scholars are talking about, some type of issues of oppression or whatever, and they are specifically using the lowercase w in white for particular reason and purpose. And so if it is, I would say, in that debate, then you may want to follow the rule of, the journal that you are publishing to, or be prepared to justify why you are, using the lowercase w in white. I've seen it used as a political or, a social justice reason. It's not just, oh, I didn't feel like capitalizing it, but there's a particular purpose for why that person may be lowercasing the W in white. But the APA standard says capitalize it. But that's what editorial boards are for as well. And this is a good conversation to kind of have, because I've seen this come up and people, will have their justification for why they're doing X or Y. And so I've seen still with current work that's coming out that there's a reason why that's being lowercase, but it tends to be in spaces where BIPOC or other marginalized voices are being centered and they're the leads in that work. Font choice. We now have more options. Times New Roman, Georgia, Calibri, Arial, Lucidia Sans Code. We have options, and I have designated the font size here. There are different templates that are offered and different distinctions that are made between what a student paper looks like and what a professional paper looks like. If you are a student in SOLS, then the expectation is that you are using the guidelines of the professional paper, unless your instructor has designated something different. This is to help prepare you for your future as a scholar, as a contributor to the scholarships. So this helps train you on the use of the professional paper, which looks more like the journal articles that you see. And to that note, I have designated with these different colors, the kind of lavender color for professional paper, the yellow color for student paper, how different things are set up in the paper. The running head has now changed. We no longer use the words running head. And for the professional paper, you would have the running head plus the page number is only required for manuscripts that you plan to submit for publication to somewhere. Student papers would use the page number only unless requested by the instructor or the institution. And so there's more guidance on that. The heading levels have definitely changed, and it is important that you look at those. Guidelines levels 3 through 5 have been updated. And I find that for the most part, people don't really use levels 4 and 5 very often. And sometimes they don't use them very well. So if you are familiar with using levels 1, 2, 3, you're probably in a good space. Okay. Other formatting changes. 1 space after ending punctuation, not 2. We're not using old school typewriters anymore, so we don't need to do the double space after ending punctuation. Quotation marks are used instead of italics for linguistic expressions. So instead of they in italics, you would use they in quotation marks. and there's extra guidance here as designated. And some quick answers for running head, margins. Don't play around with the margins trying to make your paper longer. It's standard 1-inch margins. Okay. Unless you're doing a dissertation or a thesis and you intend to have it printed, then the printer may ask you to change the margins to accommodate your binding, but that is not something that we tend to do much anymore, is to actually print out dissertation or theses. So this is an exception to the rule. Italics be used for a word in a different language. I'm gonna have to consult the APA manual on that. Ping me on that question during the Q&A, so I'll remember that. Okay. Heading levels, we talked about that. How to construct lists, there's guidance on that. Tables. And just like with JARs, there's some basic and essential information that should be included when you are constructing a table or a figure. And so APA has some guidance on what those essentials are and how they need to be represented within items. Table of contents is now called the order of pages. And the general order of pages is listed here. Title page, abstract, the content or text, references, footnotes if you have any. That's another thing that's kind of not or rarely used within APA style is footnotes, tables, figures, and then any appendices. Okay. Get used to writing an abstract. Abstracts help lead people to your work. It also helps people know if they want to continue reading your work. So think about like when you are searching for research, that we tend to look at title, we look at author information, we look at the abstract. And if the abstract ain't hitting on it, then you're probably not going to read the rest of the paper. So a well-written abstract is key. Title page, there's guidelines for what the title page looks like for a student paper and for the professional paper. Again, if you are in a SOLS program, I recommend following the guidelines for the professional paper unless your professor says to do otherwise. The serial comma is used for 3 or more items and letter lists. And if you are already using a comma in the series, then use semicolons between the items instead of commas. Quotations, there's guidance on how to quote, direct quote, and paraphrasing. Cannot say this enough. Cite when you paraphrase. Okay. If you do not, that is academic dishonesty, because you're not giving credit to the contributor that you're using. So cite it, okay? This is one of the most frequent things I see people getting, kind of dinged for, with either reduction of points or plagiarism allegations. is the lack of citing the work that they have used from someone else. And paraphrasing tends to trip up people more than others. Okay. Block quotes. Lots of guidance on block quotes. Again, it's not something that you want to make a habit in your paper. But there is guidance, and you tend to see more of the block quote formatting being used when someone is writing a qualitative or mixed methods paper and they're using quotes from people that they've interviewed or from their focus group or something. That's typically when you see the block quote format used more frequently in a paper. Okay. We're going to skip that for the APA 6. And then I have a whole bunch of quick answer references for you on how to cite, the most common things that we use for the reference list and for the in-text citations. That includes journal articles. Now, you've heard me throughout, this talk today use the terms resource when I'm referring in general to anything that we could cite. Journal articles when I actually mean a journal article. Book chapters when I actually mean a book chapter. I would encourage you to get used to differentiating the different formatting types. Another thing that I see people get tripped up on when they are getting dinged for incorrect citations, that is because they're calling everything a journal article, and thus they cite everything as if it's a journal article. Well, everything that you may use in your paper may not be a journal article. So I encourage you to get used to how the different formats look, so that when you are ready to cite, you are citing it properly. And if you have questions, ask me. I will tell you what format something is in case you are, you can't figure out if it's a journal article or a magazine article, because some of those may look different. Okay. Citing Twitter, YouTube, a lot of edited book chapters. There are different ways from that. Oh, yeah. So we have a question about paraphrasing versus quoting too much. There's kind of a prevailing idea that paraphrasing is preferred because it shows an additional level of analysis than directly quoting. And I will check the APA manual, but as far as I know, there's no specific guidance on, what's too much for directly quoting. But I'll check the manual for that. I think it's more of a preference generally in the scholarly community for paraphrasing, because it supposedly shows an extra layer of analysis. Okay. Well, we've gone through the document, and now I will pause and see if we have any additional questions from the floor. And I will pause the recording.